All right, in this video I want to talk about how to make a transformational event. I think one of the biggest things that has led to success for me with Flying Sage and the community that I built has been creating really compelling events that honestly, like, for a large part of the time when I was creating the Flying Sage, and even today to some extent, I don't really in my mind consider them events. Like, I do consider them to be, in a lot of cases, ceremonies or activations or like mini festivals. I don't know, like events I feel like is a word that can kind of get lost on people. And even to this day, like, I never really even considered the Flying Sage to be an events company, but I have found it helpful to put myself in that category, because at the end of the day, when you're organizing even ceremonies, let's say in the psychedelic space or wellness space, you are organizing events when you're bringing people together, right, in physical space. So just for simplicity's sake, we'll use the term events, and in this case, transformational events. So especially if you're in the business of creating wellness events, I'd say that's kind of where I have the most experience. So, I think you can create transformational concerts, you can create transformational cooking events. Probably I don't have experience with that, but what I do have experience with is creating transformational events in terms of giving people opportunity to access emotional release, to access different, like, deeper parts of themselves through things like breath work. So, like, actually accessing parts of our subconscious, and then essentially having mind manifesting experience. That's what the term psychedelic means. And I feel like psychedelic experiences that are with higher doses can lend themselves very deeply to that. So they can be extremely mind manifesting in the sense that they're really diving deep into our subconscious. But you can have experiences that are kind of more mid-threshold level, where you're not necessarily diving super deep, where you're going to need like a whole week to integrate an experience, or months or years, but you're just kind of dipping your toes into these mind expanding states. And that's really what I've tried to do with the Flying Sage. And so coming back to this question of, like, how do you really create transformational events, I think a really big important thing right off the bat is safety. So you really need to create a sense of safety in your community, and that comes from a lot of different places. So I think first, as a founder, especially in the early days, you are the one that's generating that sense of safety. Like, you as a human being are going to be feeding that, because in the early days you don't have a team, you don't necessarily have other community leaders or facilitators that'll necessarily be fueling that. Like, you kind of need to set the foundation for that. And so that's where it's important to really, like, especially if you're doing work in the psychedelic space or with any of these other modalities, like, you really need to have a good foundation of experience yourself with them before you decide to create a community around it. So that's like number one. And then other notes around safety. Physical space is important. So, right, like, if you tried to, I think there's a give and take on this, because I do think it's important to have a safety in a physical space, in terms of just like making a space feel comfortable, making it look comfortable, and then also, like, for example, having doors that lock, and having the facilitators be aware of the different spaces that are available. And so I say there's a give and take here, because with the Flying Sage, we've even run breathwork events that I'd say are pretty transformative, but we've done them in public parks. And so I think safety, developing that felt sense of safety, I think more so depends on the people and the container that's created, and that doesn't have to always be physical. So even though I do think physical spaces can play an important role in creating safety, I also think the majority of the safety that's created actually comes from the energetics of the space. So this includes the facilitator actually creating safety with their words and with the energetics of their facilitation. So having this be a key pillar, I think, is really important when you're creating transformational events. You have to have that safety, because this is even more true with psychedelic guided experiences, right? Like, you need to provide a depth of safety so that people can then go into the depths of themselves. So that's really key. Let's see, another thing to focus on with building transformational events is the modalities that you do offer. So I think yoga is a beautiful modality. I'm not an expert in yoga, and I think the more adept you get at yoga and the more you develop it as a practice, I'm sure the more that you can actually go deeper with it as a modality, and I'm sure it can produce very powerful altered states. My sense, though, for most people who are attending yoga classes or even adopting yoga as a practice is it doesn't necessarily facilitate emotional release. It doesn't necessarily provide like the feeling of transformation as you walk away from a class. I feel like it can be very restorative, it can be grounding, it can be amazing for the body, but it doesn't quite hit the same spot like something like breathwork does, for example. Now, breathwork as an example of a modality is great because in a fairly short and condensed time you can have quite the significant emotional release, and obviously that then needs to be paired again with the safety to be able to hold that. But if you're really looking to create opportunities for people to really drop in and to actually have powerful experiences, then it's important to focus on, I think, modalities like breathwork. I think it's a great one because you don't really need anything for it, right? You know, mushroom journeys and LSD journeys, like these are all psychedelic journeys in general, like these are obviously also very powerful catalysts for transformation, but they require a lot more energy. And I don't think you can necessarily, for example, offer a high dose LSD session to 30 people at once with just one facilitator. Like there's a lot, the point I'm trying to make is that you need a lot more care and intention and time to be able to deliver a service like that. And that is why the price, the cost is higher with something like that. Whereas with a breathwork class, like while you can have one-on-one breathwork classes and you can, go a lot deeper with an individual person and create, a high ticket, you could say, like offerings around that, I'd say it also is a modality that lends itself well to a kind of a group class, such as what you would find with yoga. Sound baths also is another great example of a modality that we focus on. And let's see, dance as well, so movement is really beautiful. So the point here is make sure you are working with the right modalities, right? Cycling, I think, is great for the body, but it's not necessarily going to be transformational in the sense that I'm speaking to here. And I suppose transformational can mean different things to lots of people, right? You can have, a fitness community that is going to be transformational, but here I'm specifically talking about transformational in terms of, I suppose, healing, right? That's the big focus of the Flying Sage, is at the end of the day providing spaces for healing and for accessing emotional release. So those are, I'd say, two important things. Again, focusing on safety and how to build that. And then number two is focusing on the modalities that you're using. And let's see, I think at the end of the day, another big piece, especially when it comes to community building, is having repetition and having consistency. So I'll probably make a whole video about this, but when you're building community, you really do need consistency. And I think that's where in a traditional events business and a community are differentiated, because you can have an events business that runs random events here or there, or even like travels around the world to run events, which is awesome. But you're not necessarily going to be building community in that way, because you're not actually creating these like ongoing rituals or ongoing spaces, consistent spaces where people can come to connect with one another. You're just kind of creating these like pockets of connection, but then there's just they just get dispersed, right? Whereas I think to build true community, whether that's in the wellness space or in other spaces, you need to have like these ongoing rituals, and you need to have consistency with events. And I think that's where that really starts. We can get into a whole other video about specific rituals that you can include in your community, but at the end of the day, consistency is super key. So that means having events scheduled on like a weekly or monthly basis, not just doing them ad hoc. You want people to be able to know that they can come at a certain time to meet a certain type of people, and this is really, really key. So I'll leave it at that for now. Those are, I'd say, three really important factors in creating transformational events. You've got safety, you've got the types of modalities that you use, and then you also have, third, the consistency and I'd say just the reliability of the offerings that you have.